Hello? Thank God. I thought I was alone here. Can you help me? Or are you lost too?
Ah, shit. Here we go again.
Survival horror is back. It has been back for a while now. It feels like yesterday when Amnesia came out and Capcom abandoned traditional Resident Evil horror, and for a while things felt pretty bleak for the survival aspect of horror until Capcom returned to its roots with Resident Evil 7 and the indie scene started going with the Alisa and Tormented Souls until the door was fully blown off its hinges by Signalis. And now we have Crow Country, Conscript, Hollow Body, and who knows what else I'm missing. All of that leading up to a remake of one of the greatest horror games ever made, Silent Hill 2, which had me incredibly worried about it since, well, it was Silent Hill 2, one of the greatest horror games ever made. But my worries were mostly unfounded, since it ended up being a pretty damn good game, even though I felt it was stretched way too thin for the sake of delivering a longer experience. Why did they do that? I don't know, maybe Bluebird Team and Konami wanted to justify the extra $10 that people have to put down for their games nowadays. After finishing a game that long and gloomy, you would think that I wouldn't be in any rush to pick up another horror game so soon, and you would be absolutely right, but I was going to open up an exception since this is about a game that I have been waiting for a while now. One I was waiting since the announcement trailer. A game that was meant to be released October last year, but was unfortunately delayed to March this year, only to be delayed again and end up releasing day and date with the goddamn Oblivion remaster. I mean, holy struck of bad luck, Backman. Good luck with that relaunch or whatever they're planning. At last though, the game is finally in our hands, and I can finally talk about Post-Trauma. Yeah, that's the name of the game. With a name like that, I wonder what game could have inspired it. I wonder what the theme and message of the game is going to be. I could only wonder. The game begins mysteriously with our protagonist, Roman, waking up in an abandoned train with no idea of how he got there. If he wants to survive though, and if you want to guide him on this journey, the very first lesson that you need to learn is that post-trauma doesn't give a single shit about you. The environment is not only bleak and hostile, the game itself does not care about streamlining any of its design or going easy on you at all. The very first thing you must do to get Roman off the train is to solve a puzzle. Usually this is supposed to be an easy puzzle, you just started the game gotta ease you on its mechanics and such. Use the puzzle to teach you a little bit of navigation and it's going to have a simple solution, but oh no, not here. You better bust out the notebook because you're going to have to do math. Simple math with single digits, but still math, and you're going to have to do it while keeping in mind different symbols and comparing different maps of the subway lines that have different information because each map is torn in a different place, spread all across the train. It took me 20 minutes to figure out the solution to this when I first played the demo. I was stuck on the very first obstacle of the game for 20 minutes, and I have to admit, that's one hell of a way to make a first impression. The rest of the game is similarly designed. There are no maps that you can carry with you, you can only sometimes find them placed on a wall that you can use for some basic referencing, so you have to keep everything in your head. Things that are obviously out of place and are clearly meant to be hints to a puzzle can be present in any room, but that doesn't mean they necessarily relate to the puzzle or lock that exists in the same room. They could be related to a completely different puzzle in a completely different room. And the cherry on top of this hardcore sundae is that whenever you interact with something, Roman will give you a short description of it. You know, old school survival horror protagonist stuff. Except, in order to use an item on something, all you need to do is to be in the general vicinity of the obstacle and then manually select the item on the inventory screen. There is no short list of items that show up when you interact with a keyhole. There is no indication that you can use an item at all. Anything that has a short description could be a puzzle piece, or it could be just set dressing. You have to figure it out yourself. And there is no hint system or in-game walkthrough, no. All you have to figure things out are your wits. There is no indication that the actual puzzle is in another room, or any clue that one piece of scenery is more important than the next. You just have to piece things logically yourself and be curious about stuff. And honestly, at this point, you probably can already tell if post-trauma is going to be your kind of game or not. If you hate hand-holding, if you hate yellow paint, well, they finally made a game just for you. But if you crave any kind of modern quality of life feature, you might possibly want to stay away, since the only thing here that could help you is that there is a little eye icon that pops on the corner of the screen whenever you can interact with something. Now, personally, I love quality of life features, but a game like Post-Trauma doesn't really need many of those, because those features were tailor-made in order to make games with crazy big open worlds or incredibly complex systems more palatable, made to help you figure out which content and quests are missable. But this game is a much smaller toy box, crafted just big enough to give you pause on how to use the tools you're given, but not big enough for you to actually get lost in. And in that context, not being given any clue about where to use the clues, or even what can be used to solve puzzles in the environment, actually helps this game immensely. It adds to the hostility of the environment. It makes you feel like you're going to a real place, since not everything you can interact with is relevant to your immediate needs, even though it's not a real place. It is an abstract nightmare, but you get what I mean. Most importantly though, it made me feel like a real smart boy whenever I figure something out. I have to note though that just because there isn't lots of missable content doesn't mean there is no missable content. I only did one playthrough, but during said playthrough I missed out on 1 out of the 4 lore tapes, and I even missed out on the pistol weapon entirely, meaning I ended up missing on both 25% of the lore and 25% of the weapons. When I said this game doesn't hold your hand, it really doesn't hold your hand. Because of that, it is more important than ever to pay proper attention to the environment. Thankfully, the environment is so delightfully and creatively warped by grime and darkness that any horror fan worth its salt would want to explore every nook and cranny anyway. You won't be able to get up close and personal with most of it because you are always kept at an arm's length due to, the fixed camera angle. And yes, I'm still a super duper fixed camera angle apologist. While the camera got stuck on the wrong thing twice during my playthrough, for 99% of it, it worked perfectly. And it's always cool to see all of the different ways that developers can frame a scene when given complete directorial control of what's on the screen. From crazy Dutch angles to framing the protagonist from the outside of windows to keeping you paranoid by hiding enemies just out of frame so you just hear them but you can't properly see them and you're like, whoa, where are they going to come from? And they even show things to you, the player, that the protagonist isn't aware of, heightening the tension. Overall, there are a lot of ways that you can use a fixed camera angle to your advantage, and I'm glad Post-Trauma is aware of them and decided to just use all of them. I also love the use of moving pieces in the backgrounds. A lot of games in the survival horror genre have incredibly static backgrounds, which given that you usually go to dead and lifeless places, it kind of makes sense, but it's just nicer when you actually get to see some creepy stuff going on, isn't it? Like when you go near a brick wall that is a bit odd, trying to figure out what is going on, only to notice that it is odd because every brick is moving back and forth. It is a creepy sight, like the walls are alive, but not necessarily relying on the usual blood and guts for it. Though rest assured, there are plenty of blood and guts everywhere anyway, for good measure. In general, I'd say, based on this vague criteria of moving pieces, Post-Trauma tries to do quite a bit more than a lot of other survival horror games. with one set piece in particular during the creepy hospital segment, because of course there's a creepy hospital segment, making me stop and stand still and just think about what the fuck was going on with, well, everything around me. I don't want to spoil it, but it was great. The art direction and the level of detail are so good that it is just a bit of a shame that on the technical side, the game falters a bit because it suffers from severe pop-in, and I do mean severe. And honestly, I can guess why. But for a game that was basically a one-man show for the longest time, these visuals are a miracle. This is also probably not the best part to mention it, but since there is no good part to mention it at this point, I just want to tell you that I lied. You can in fact get up close with the spookiness when you play as Carlos, because you see, occasionally the game will switch to a completely different protagonist that you get to play in first person. His segments are 99% puzzles with no combat options available, though I don't really mind that part because 80% of the normal campaign just don't have any combat in it. But still, I really appreciate that the developers took the time to give us this completely new perspective. First person is also pretty spooky, arguably the spookiest way to present a horror game, since, well, you can't see anything behind you at all, and you can get fully immersed in your role. Still, at the end of everything, his segments felt more like sudden abrupt stops in the middle of the actual journey, since for about 75% of the playtime you'll still be playing as Roman, following basically a completely different storyline, and Carlos' B-plot has basically, well, honestly, it has pretty much no relation to the main plot, except that Carlos shows up for 3 minutes in the main plot and you get to learn what his deal is, I guess? And this allows me to not so gently segue into talking about the two things that this game doesn't really do great at. Because while the puzzles, level design, and art direction are excellent, they are dragged down by the combat and the story. There isn't much to the combat. It is awkward, and melee combat is tied to a stamina bar, and so is a basic little dodge that you can do. Combat has always been a little bit awkward in fixed camera games, since it's really hard to get a read on positioning. But Post-Trauma is extra bad about it. For example, the hitbox placement in Silent Hill games can sometimes be a little weird. So Post-Trauma decided to go all the way and completely fucked it up to hell, to the point that the main strategy in melee combat is to just awkwardly try to stay inside an enemy to clip inside of it so they will miss you while you try not to miss them. The issue is so bad, it's not even like an advantage to either party. It's not that the hitboxes are so bad that the enemy has an advantage. No, it's just that you have to learn to embrace this badness as you both try to out-glitch each other. And while if you're following this channel, you know that I like janky stuff, and you probably also can tolerate a certain level of jank. And from that perspective, I know it sounds awesome, but it is not, because part of the jankiness is that this out-glitching is not consistent. Dodging is horrible, because Roman will always dodge directly behind him. But unlike other games in the genre, Post-Trauma does not have tank controls. At least it didn't seem to have them when I played it, but I have seen patch notes that indicate that the developers added them, which is good because you actually want tank controls, because if you do not have tank controls, this means that what's behind Roman can change at a moment's notice. For example, let's say you're attacking an enemy and you decide to run away from him, but then he decides to start an attack animation and you push the dodge button by muscle memory. What would happen? Yep, Roman is going to dodge directly into the attack, because he doesn't actually dodge in the direction you're pushing the button, is always behind the character himself. Ranged combat is not any better. You fire using the right trigger, so you think that you'd aim using the left trigger, but since the left trigger is the run button, instead you don't aim at all and you simply have to take a risk every time you fire. You could hit an enemy, or you could miss and then get stuck in the world's longest recoil animation. Look, I get that Roman is an old man that's out of shape, but the amount of time that he needs to ready the shotgun again is ridiculous. It makes you wonder how he didn't immediately die by tripping on a random soda can. In summary, combat is bad. Avoid it if you can. And maybe that's the developer's intent. Maybe they made the combat intentionally bad, or they decided to just leave it quite janky because it was not a priority. You know, you have to choose what to prioritize when making a game, and they were like, oh, you know, we don't have to prioritize combat because the intent is that people will actually avoid and run away from the monsters. But that's easier said than done when you don't have a map, when you can't bring information with you, so you have to constantly go between rooms and analyze everything that you're seeing so you can figure out where exactly the next puzzle is and what information you have to put there. Like I said, information from a puzzle is not necessarily always in the same room as the puzzle. But we have to move on, we don't have all day after all. So let's talk about the story. And I have to say, it's not a bad story, it just lacks the punch that other games in the genre have. Not to compare a coughing baby to a hydrogen bomb, but because of the genre and the inspiration, we just have to talk about Silent Hill 2. And Silent Hill 2's story is actually pretty straightforward. There's absolutely no way that you don't understand the key events at the end of the game that led to the plot, and that you get hit full force by the emotional beats. There is a lot of unclear elements and vague symbolism in the environment and in the enemies that fans debate about to this day. And it's a lot of fun to try and fill in the blanks, but the blanks are minimal compared to the overarching plot. By the end of the game, the writers ensured that you absolutely knew the important stuff. Same with another great game in the same genre, Signalis. The physics of how things happened, it's insane, and there's eldritch stuff all over the place, and let's be honest, overall, it copied Silent Hill's 2 homework to the point that both games even end with an emotional ladder near the end, and honestly, I can even fault it for that. It knew what to lift from Silent Hill 2, and it knew where to put its own little things, and both games have impeccable storytelling. Post-Trauma, on the other hand, only hints at possible events and possible connections between them, with a lot of events seemingly not even being connected to each other at all. It's hard to tell, since it seems like the game lifts from the Silent Hill idea of everybody ended up in the town for a different reason, the Silent Hill 2 idea of everybody ended up in the town for a different reason. In this case, every character is in the nightmare for a completely separate reason, yet a couple of them are connected to each other in some odd ways, and nothing ever really gels together, even at the very end. Roman himself is a very odd protagonist. I can't get a read on him. He is voiced by a Japanese actor, and his entry point into the nightmare is a metro station that has garbled Japanese written all over the signs, but Roman's first thought when waking up is trying to speak to everybody he can in English. But he also occasionally swears in Japanese when taken by surprise.
Hello? So...
I do want to give credit where credit is due. I do think the developers might have had a story intent with these decisions. Very late in the game, you get to revisit a location, but instead of unreadable text or corrupted Japanese letters, you get some proper English. And Roman makes note of that, saying that the place he is hasn't adapted to him yet. I think this implies that his first language might actually be Japanese, and that the nightmarescape he's in is mixed with the traumas of several other people, that everybody gets their own nightmarescape or something. But like I said, the game is very vague about all things in it, not just the lore or the things that are meant to come off as emotional beats. It's vague about everything. But mostly it just comes off as funny how this old guy with a Western name goes around talking with a Japanese accent, sounding completely lost when he speaks with all of these other characters that also have clear Western names and accents. I think this decision might have been partially to create a surreal atmosphere to the game, especially given that the voice acting, sometimes the voice acting is perfect, but other times it seems that like they should have gotten a few extra takes. But honestly, the cutscenes here are just not scary at all. Sometimes they can be downright hilarious.
Hey, hey! Can you see me? Are you her?
You don't belong here. Why are you here?
Oh no! Oh no! 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 Oh no! Shit! I didn't mean. Wait! Shit! 난다트다.
But what really mattered though isn't if Roman is Japanese or not, or what his first language is, or how he ended up here. No, what really matters are the emotions. And the emotions never really hit more than skin deep due to the game's lack of commitment when talking about its themes. Roman is a conflicted character, and if he did what I think he did to get this traumatized, he's quite possibly one of the most morally reprehensible survival horror protagonists in existence. But at the very end of the game, he's contrasted with a teenage girl, and it is a lot more obvious what the teenage girl did to get her trauma, and it's nowhere near as bad as what he did, assuming you know that he did what he did. It's hard to understand and come to a conclusion about to what degree we should empathize and understand him when the game is so wishy-washy about what he actually did before he ended up here, about what his actual relation with the only other character who seems to really know him is. Like I said, the game is just very vague and refuses to give any clear information to you. It's clear to me that all of the characters have suffered from some trauma before arriving here, and there are little hints of why they ended up here, but I don't feel like any of their traumas were properly addressed. Any hint that they might overcome these psychological challenges feel empty. For all of the horrible nightmares that Roman has to face, it never feels like him or any other character do anything that makes me believe that they can actually move on. Even though the very last cutscene of the game seems to want me to desperately believe that I just played through some epic journey of self-reflection. That's just the thing with classic survival horror like Silent Hill 2. The mechanics of the hellscape are unclear, but the actual plot is straightforward, and you feel sympathy towards its characters at their most devastatingly emotionally raw moments. That's the thing with modern classics like Signalis. The mechanics of the hellscape are unclear, but the actual plot is straightforward, and you feel sympathy towards its characters at their most devastatingly emotionally raw moments. And that's the thing with post-trauma. The mechanics of the hellscape are unclear, but the actual plot is a mess, and you have no idea who to root for or if you should be rooting for someone until the very end. I do need to say though that I don't think vague stories are necessarily bad. Not every story needs to be straightforward. Hell, some of my favorite games out there are the Civil War games by Suda51, and those games are crazy. They're so crazy it's sometimes hard to decipher, sometimes almost impossible to decipher what is even going on, even what the events are in those games. And I love those games, I just absolutely love them. But post-trauma is not like that. Post-trauma sits right in the middle, in which it is not straightforward and it is not vague. It is not crazy enough for you to come up with crazy fun theories about it, but it also doesn't stick the landing and just says what it wants to say, so it sits in a very frustrating middle ground. And that's very fitting, since those are my feelings towards post-trauma. They are very frustrating and mixed. It is a good game with a nice art style, and it is highly respectful of the player's intelligence. I don't regret playing it at all, but also at the same time, I can only recommend it to hardcore survival horror aficionados like me who are looking for something new to sink their fangs into. Everybody else is unfortunately better off checking what inspired post-trauma first to see if they're really invested enough to also sink their fangs into this one. So that's it, that's the end of the video. Thank you for watching me ramble about video games to the very end. Please leave a comment, like, subscribe, or dislike, whatever engagement you want to, and I hope to count on your continued support in the very near future.